The Star Wars mythos has no shortage of diverse creatures and beasts from across all corners of the galaxy, from sentient life dedicated to simply living peacefully, to some of the most ferocious beasts to traverse the known regions of the galaxy. Star Wars sports arguably the most diverse cast of creatures, monsters, species, and races of modern pop culture. Recently, we delved into the history and personality of the Rancor, and the general trends and tendencies of the species, as well as where they came from and how they've risen to prominence throughout the galaxy. But today, we'll be covering the history of two of their most terrifying sister species, because of the simple fact that the most dangerous variants and versions of Rancors in the Star Wars mythos are not in fact full-blooded Rancors. But we wanted to make a video detailing some of the most deadly Rancors that have ever existed within Star Wars. Because of this, we hope you understand that we generally in this video explore the evolution of the Rancor and not the Rancor species as a whole. So stick with us, weary travelers of the galaxy, and let's discuss the fearsome creatures known as the Pterantitex and the Crystallide Rancors, and dive into how they were painfully mutated into the fearsome creatures that they have come to be. First, let's start out with the Pterantitex beast. Pterantitex closely resemble Rancors, though they were roughly a quarter of the size and had crowning spikes that lined their bodies, while Rancors, however, were domesticated creatures that arose throughout the natural process of galactic evolution. Pterantitex were artificially created, though multiple different accounts of their creation exist and are present in modern Star Wars canon. We will explore a few options of their origins. During the Age of the Ancient Sith, many Sith Lords would practice the art of Sith spawn, which entailed utilizing the darkest aspects of the Force as well as Sith alchemy to genetically alter existing life forms and create new creatures for their own nefarious purposes. By using Sith alchemy as well as genetic experimentation, as well as the dark side of the Force, the Sith conducted incredibly inhumane experiments on existing creatures with the express intention of enslavement. They would alter the brain patterns as well as the physical characteristics of many of these poor creatures, seeking to make them more brutal, more violent, and much more cunning than they would have been in their unaltered states, as well as specifically conditioning them to behave as slaves to their Sith masters. And across the generations, numerous practitioners of the dark side have delved into the creation of the Sith spawn. Eventually, the Sith even engineered specific devices, including the Dark Staff, that were specifically designed with the express intention of turning creatures from across the galaxy into these Sith spawn, as the Sith spawn would then be enslaved as minions to their various Sith Lord masters. The Rancor subspecies known as a Pterantitex are widely believed to be the result of Sith spawn experimentation, and it is theorized that the first Pterantitex were actually deformed Rancors who had been enslaved by the Sith and subjected to their dark arts. A Pterantitex is essentially a dark side Rancor brought to its ultimate form. Luke Skywalker himself delved into the history of the Pterantitex species and Sith spawn, and while this was never formally confirmed, the prevailing theory seems to be that Rancors were used as the template for these creatures, and the Sith spawn was used to mutate them into Pterantitex that we know and fear today. If this is the true history of the beast, then they were likely once under the enslavement of the Sith master known as Exar Kun, one of the most prolific Sith Lords of his era and the leading pioneer of creating Sith spawn. His genetic experiments and affinity for dark alchemy and Force manipulation led to numerous Sith spawn creatures, one of which was likely the Pterantitex. Another account of the beast's creation comes from the story account by the ancient master of the Jedi Order, Quan Jang, who was attempting to artificially engineer a beast that could sense bombs during the Despot War. Though the true history of the Pterantitex is muddled and multiple conflicting accounts exist, the result entailed creating a creature who had a thirst for Force-sensitive blood. Be it due to Master Quan Jang's experiments or Sith alchemy, the Pterantitex developed a taste for Force-enriched meat, and because of this, soon after became some of the most fearsome Jedi hunters in the entire galaxy. Luckily for the Jedi though, they were few in number. Their presence in the galaxy would soon after wane, and due to their lengthy hibernation patterns and their numbers dwindling, the creatures ultimately achieved mythic status. Their legend was told among both the Jedi and the Sith, and sightings of such beasts were considered landmarks in galactic history. Because of this, they have re-emerged during some of the darkest points in galactic history, seeking nourishment in the form of Force-enriched blood. The Pterantitex have been present throughout many of these dark times, repopulating their numbers and roaming the galaxy with increased frequency while the dark side was at its strongest, including during the rise of the infamous Sith Lords such as Revan and Malak, and even the reign of Palpatine and the era of the Galactic Empire. Despite their infrequent sightings, however, they were widely regarded as fearsome fearsome Jedi killers, and Jedi learned to be avoidant of these creatures at any cost, one of the few creatures in the galaxy in fact. One of the few documented encounters took place between Jedi Grandmaster Yoda and Count Dooku before his ultimate departure from the Order. Dooku regarded the creature with great respect following this encounter, telling about its poisonous claws and imposing tusks, though he would also remark that while ferocious, they were not very smart. Though despite the muddled, uncertain history of the Pterantitex, the story of the Crystallides was more straightforward. These two were products of Sith spawn engineering, though Exar Kun was not the only Sith to practice this art, and he was far from the last. The Crystallides were engineered by Emperor Palpatine himself, and are modern mutants that were designed to be his own personal lapdogs of sorts. Palpatine engineered the race of Crystallide Rancors and repurposed old Sith-altered Leviathans to serve his own nefarious purposes as he grew the reach of his galactic empire in the early days of the Imperial era. These Rancor variants seem to be derived from the Rancors that we are more familiar with and that we know, and though they have never been explicitly called Rancors, these creatures bear a striking resemblance to Rancors, and the implication is that Palpatine altered Rancor physiology for his own purposes. These Crystallides had a particular affinity for seeking out the largest available adversaries, and oftentimes attacked everything in sight with the exception of other Crystallides, showcasing their brute strength and indomitable fighting will. While these creatures weren't heavily explored in the canon material during the reign of the Empire, expanded content showcases that these Crystallides in great detail, and showcases just how dire their involvement was in rebel cause, as well as the many impediments that they caused enemies of the Empire even following its collapse, as many of them still roamed the galaxy without their master. In the year 10 ABY, commandos of the New Republic launched an attack on the Imperial Citadel that housed the remaining Imperial forces. Utilizing Viper droids to their advantage, the New Republic held the upper hand for the duration of the conflict, and though the Vipers proved to be incredibly formidable against the preliminary security, the release of the Crystallide Rancors drastically turned the tide of the battle in favor of the Imperials. The Crystallide's teeth were able to puncture and destroy the drones with ease, though Rancors were not the only creatures to be mutated into these Crystallide beasts. Over the years, sightings of Gundarks, Katarns, Vorskers had also been mutated into these Crystallide variants were recorded by the Jedi and the Rebels, and the effects of Sith spawn are still felt throughout the furthest reaches of the galaxy. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of these ferocious cousins to the Rancor? Would you like to see a deep dive into more creatures from across Star Wars lore? And if so, who else would you like to see explored? Thank you again so much for watching, and tell me, of these two variants of the Rancor, which do you believe to be the more deadly? As always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and I will hopefully catch you in the next video.